With Russia now pushing for full control of southern and eastern Ukraine, Western countries are ramping up military support for Kyiv, supplying billions of euros worth of artillery, tanks, and drones. Images of suffering, death, and destruction, like these from Mariupol, are prompting Western politicians to deliver not only military, but also moral support by visiting embattled Ukrainian leaders in Kyiv. In the face of strong pressure to do more, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz now pledges to supply heavier weaponry like anti-aircraft tanks, but says he won't be visiting Kyiv anytime soon. How far can and should Western help go? We're asking, war in Ukraine, is the West already a party to the conflict? Welcome to the Point. It is a pleasure to introduce our guests. Malte Lehming is senior editor and author at the Berlin daily newspaper Der Tagesspiegel. And we're very pleased to have with us Stefanie Babst. She is a global policy advisor who formerly headed NATO's strategic foresight team. And a warm welcome to Karolina Wigura. She is a Polish journalist who frequently comments for international media and is currently a fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy. And I'd like to begin with a look at where things stand at the moment. It's just about 2 weeks since the Russian invasion entered a new phase that's focusing on southern and eastern Ukraine. Stefanie, you had, I think, 2 decades of practicing strategic foresight for NATO. So what's your take on the Russian campaign? What do you think are the objectives now?
For the time being, I think it's pretty clear that from a military point of view, Russia seeks to conquer and ultimately also sustain control over the Donbas and large parts of southern Ukraine. I understand that's the quote-unquote minimal strategic objective that President Putin seeks to achieve. But broadly, more broadly speaking, what he has been advocated and said all along is he really wants to alter the political landscape, the political map in Europe, if need be, by force. So he is still after a quote-unquote direct confrontation with us.
So does this look like to you like it would be, from Russia's point of view, a permanent occupation that they're striving for?
Definitely. If President Putin could achieve the military objectives, which seemingly are quite hard to do, namely to really conquer and ultimately sustain military control over the Donbas and the southern part of Ukraine, then Ukraine would be basically reduced to a rump state without access to the Azov, to the Black Sea and also to the Sea of Azov. And that would really be quite hard for Ukraine.
Speaking of the Sea of Azov, the port city of Mariupol and its besieged Azovstal steelworks have become the focal point of ceaseless shelling in this new phase of the campaign. For a few who had taken refuge there, the ordeal ended this week. Before we continue, let's hear their voices.
Arriving in Zaporizhia, this group from Mariupol made it all the way to this Ukrainian-controlled town on their own. We are so tired and I can't talk. I'm not feeling well after so many bombings and 2 days on the road. Completely burnt, completely destroyed by bombing. Why this war? Who needs this war? My neighbors have died. The people who I was born with and grew up with, I lived in their house. Do you understand how serious it is? Children died. Dead bodies are scattered in the streets and no one went there to remove them. Mariupol has been under siege for weeks and is now largely devastated. According to Ukrainian estimates, at least 20,000 civilians have been killed. Why is Mariupol so important to Putin?
And let me put that question straight away to Karolina. Why has Mariupol become such a focal point? The Azov Steel Works, what would be the significance for the Russian campaign?
The significance is symbolic. The Russians have been so ineffective in occupying any of the Ukrainian cities. In fact, they have successfully only occupied Kherson. then Mariupol is an extremely important part of this strategy. But I would like also to say that it's not only about strategic aims, right? Because if it was only about strategic aims, we would have a war that would be concentrated on occupying territories or cities. But we also have another goal, which is simply destroying. And I think we should underline that, because this is not only about a permanent Russian presence in Ukraine. This is not only about Mariupol or any other city. This is also about permanent destroying of Ukraine. And I think it's extremely important.
Thank you for that insight. Malte, analysts say that the Russian forces don't appear to be doing a lot better at waging this part of the campaign than they did the earlier one. That, again, we're seeing signs of ineffectiveness from a military point of view. What's your impression?
Yes, I was surprised too. I mean, most experts predicted that in the first instance, Kyiv would fall in between a couple of days. They retreated from the whole area by saying that we can't. We can't even go to Kyiv. We can't topple the government of Zelensky, President Zelensky. So what they're doing now is to do what they are best in, to just shoot and destroy cities, destroy places, kill people. And so it might be even inhabitably for Russian-speaking inhabitants of the Ukraine. So it's more a destroying affair than a conquering affair, because what to conquer? Just land. Land is nothing without industry, without people, without anything you can do. So they are trying to negate Ukraine access to the Black Sea and to the Azov Sea. So the big question will be, do they go as far as Odessa? Because Odessa is still a part of the Black Sea. And the Black Sea is important because Bulgaria and Romania are bordering to the Black Sea, and they are both NATO members. So the access to the Black Sea is very, very important strategic goal.
In fact, Stefanie, as this latest offensive began, a senior Russian military commander said that the goal of the offensive would be to create, among other things, a land bridge to Crimea. If all of this is the case, this outright destruction as an aim in itself, permanent occupation, a land bridge to Crimea, is this something that the West could let stand?
That's a very, very difficult and tricky political question, because we see, I mean, that on the camp of NATO members in the Ukraine, there is no consensual view yet. I mean, what is actually the political end state that we should achieve? I mean, what is it really that we would like Ukraine to be after the war? Are we talking about Ukraine within the pre-2014 territorial boundaries, or are we talking about a Ukraine whose territorial integrity and state sovereignty should remain within the boundaries of post-2014? So I would be very, very reluctant to make any type of prognosis here, because this really depends on a number of factors, including events, obviously, on the battlefield.
And also events in the weeks and perhaps months to come. Karolina, let me get your response on the same point. What can the West perhaps contemplate as part of a longer-term solution of some kind? And where would you say this is a clear red line for the West, and it must absolutely do everything to defeat Russian aims?
So first, I would like to echo Stefanie's answer and say that we don't know the end goal for Ukraine, and neither do we know the end goal for Russia. We actually don't know where, how, in what shape Russia comes out of this war. What do we want? Certain people already speak about forgiveness and about reconciliation with Russians after this war. But it is very difficult to speak about reconciliation when the evil is currently done.
As far as I can tell, nobody in your home country, Poland, is speaking about reconciliation.
Obviously, but my country is a part of the Eastern European region, which is historically very much experienced by the Russian imperialism. So you can say that our experience of Russian imperialism coming back and attacking our region is 200 to 300 years. That's why we have so many existential fears that are influencing our politics. Also, to be honest, that's why we are also very prone to speak from the high moral ground, saying that we knew it all over from the beginning, how the Russia would behave, and we also very often say that we know better what to do with Russia.
I want to come back in a moment to the imperialistic aims, but one question, if I may, a follow-up question in regard to what Russia might do next, and that is in connection with May 9th. There's a lot of speculation about a possible general mobilization of Russian troops, perhaps even a declaration of war against Ukraine, because we haven't had that formal declaration yet. Why is this Victory Day, as it's known, the day on which Russians commemorate the defeat of the Nazis, so important for Russia?
It's very important because it symbolizes something. It symbolizes a very important day of defeating Nazism. So this is extremely important this way. But I do believe what we can expect on the 9th of May. We have no idea what Putin will say, of course, but he will probably try to speak to his own people, to the people who are still loyal to him, not necessarily to us, not necessarily to the Ukrainians, but the people who still support him.
Malte, what would that mean in terms of the necessary Western response if, in fact, there were to be a general mobilization or an official declaration of war from Russia's side? Are those simply symbolic gestures, or would the West need to react to that in some form?
I'm very skeptical if Putin really declares a general mobilization or declares the war against Ukraine. It could not be against the West. Just because then he would admit that what he said in the beginning, we are not having a war, we have not an invasion, it's just a special operation we are having in Ukraine, was wrong. He would admit that he was wrong. I've never heard Putin saying that. So May 9th is a very delicate date for Russia because of its very, very special history. You remember Stalin was the leader with the Red Army and the Great Patriotic War against Nazi Germany, defeating Nazi Germany. This is the huge fixing point in Russian history. Stalin, on the other hand, is responsible for the Gulag, for oppressing Russian people, for the Holodomor, the hunger company in the Ukraine. So coming to terms with this really difficult past is something that is very difficult for
But what you are suggesting to me is that that is a day on which Putin would want to look strong.
Right.
If I can ask you, Stefanie, we've also heard speculation about the possible use of a tactical nuclear weapon, a battlefield nuclear weapon by Russia, as it's called. Is that something that you do consider within the realm of possibility? And again, the question, how should the West react to that?
Well, ever since President Putin started to make these quote-unquote nuclear threats public, and I think it was on day 2 of the campaign already, I started to take it obviously extremely serious because he left a modus operandi, that was established during the Cold War between nuclear powers, and that is, that you, I'm sorry, that you are extremely reluctant and extremely cautious with your strategic messaging when it comes to nuclear threats. In other words, you don't do that unless, you really, really would like to leave basically the agreed game play. And this is what President Putin has done. So I am very much reassured by the fact that President Biden said that he already some weeks ago established a so-called Tiger team in Washington that looks at concrete contingency planning in cases of potential use of WMD, also weapons of mass destruction activities, or rather, threats imposed by Russia. And I think that's good. That this is being done, it's being undertaken, but I'm a bit skeptical whether to make this a public, let's say, reason of speculation or subject of speculation, because this is exactly what plays into Putin's hand. Yeah? If we sit here around and we show that we are concerned and that we even are really scared, I mean, that's already part of his strategic messaging. So in other words, I mean, I think we should refrain a bit from these speculations. We simply say we are prepared.
Let's take a look at what some particular Western countries are now doing, starting with the United States. Malte, President Biden has now called for $33 million in further support for Ukraine. As a former Washington correspondent, what do you think Biden is striving to do here? Many analysts say this war is actually as much about Russia versus the U.S. as it is about Russia versus Ukraine. Would you agree, and would you expect that the latest U.S. move would be escalatory?
I would say the Americans are well advised not to take this as a war between Biden and Putin. This is something that Putin wants. He wants to sit side by side with the Joe Biden. We are the most powerful leaders in the world. Maybe Xi Jinping from China is joining us. But my partner in dealing with the conflict is not the Ukraine. It would be Joe Biden. I would say no, not this, and not bringing the NATO in game. It's not a war between NATO and Russia. It's a war between freedom-loving countries, so-called the West, and Russia, and occupying Ukraine, and invasion of the country, and so on. This message should be a unified message from all countries that are opposing Putin's war in the Ukraine, and not personalizing this in terms of the President of the United States and the President of Russia, and not giving the impression that we have a military bloc called NATO against Russia in these instances.
That concern, Karolina, is one of the reasons that the Germans have been extremely ambivalent about providing anything that could be considered to be heavy weaponry. Poland repeatedly pushed for Berlin to go further. And in fact, now we are seeing movement by, for example, the Bundestag, which has cleared the way for delivery of anti-aircraft tanks. Do you understand the ambivalence here in Berlin? And do you see a real shift in Chancellor Scholz's position?
So I understand that there is a vast part of the German society which is simply afraid of atom war starting in the heart of Europe. And one can understand that. The Germans are actually not alone in this fear, because the atom war is something which is being feared across other European countries too. But I must say that perhaps here the Polish perspective is an interesting one, because we are actually afraid of nuclear plants. We know this from opinion polls. But as for the atom war, it's not that anybody is now saying that they are afraid of this nuclear conflict. Why? Perhaps because, as experienced as we are by the history of Russian neighborhood, we basically think if the Russians go in, if they cross the Ukrainian border and go further west, for example, or further south, the destruction will be there anyway. So what is the difference? This is one thing. The other thing, of course, connected with the nuclear war is the question whether we can at all provoke Putin. There is this wonderful historian, Stephen Kotkin, who wrote a very interesting biography of Joseph Stalin, who wrote an interesting piece saying, well, in 1939, NATO was not there. 200 years ago, NATO was not there. So perhaps this idea that NATO or any country in the West could provoke something in Russia is not right. Perhaps it's rather a long cultural and political habit that we are observing coming back right into the heart of Europe.
Sorry, got my eye on the clock, so I'm going to stop you there, Malte, because I do want to just quickly listen to a statement by Chancellor Scholz. Responding to charges that he has become a warmonger, the German Chancellor told the traditional May Day rally of German trade unions that radical pacifism has become obsolete.
We will continue to support Ukraine with money, with humanitarian aid. But it also must be said, we will support its ability to defend itself by supplying arms, as many other European countries are doing. That is essential now. I respect all attitudes. But a Ukrainian citizen must find it cynical to be told to defend against Putin's aggression without weapons. This isn't where we are.
Stefanie, not an easy thing for a social democratic chancellor to say. You could hear the catcalls there in the background the entire time. What do you think? Will the German government now follow through and act on those words? Are we seeing a real qualitative shift in Germany's willingness to play a more proactive role in general when it comes to European security?
I hope so. But I'm cautiously optimistic. Let's put it like this. I think on the one hand, one has to bear in mind that indeed it wasn't easy for a coalition government that started with a completely different political agenda to make a U-turn and then turn into a crisis management mode dealing with the fallout of a really full-scale military conflict in the midst of Europe. And if you'd look at how social democrats within the party, but also the Green Party, has started to shift, has started to become really refocused, I personally think they've done a pretty good job. If you look at individual actors, if you look at the Chancellor himself, I personally think crisis communication looks a little bit different. I would have personally appreciated if he had come more if he had become more focused and more targeted in his strategic messaging. At the end of the day, I think what matters for the government is to convey to the German public that they have a plan. Yeah. That we do have a plan.
Are they succeeding in that, Malte?
No, I don't think so. I even don't think that German plans will solve the problem. The problem in the war is a much bigger problem than the one that Germany alone can deal with. I mean, we need the cooperation, the unified cooperation of the bloc that we are called the West, a value-orientated group of nations that simply cannot abide by the rules of war and by not obeying to international law rights. And that should be our message. We should be in coordinate with our partners in Europe, in the United States, what the plan is. It's simple. German plan is not. I mean, it's
Clearly.
not something.
So let's talk a little bit about the NATO plan. And again, we have very little time, but I do want to talk about the possible application for membership to NATO by Finland and Sweden. Their prime ministers have just been here in Germany visiting with the German cabinet. Germany said it will support any application from the two if that goes forward. NATO's eastern expansion has been one of the things that has made Putin see red for at least 15 years now, Karolina. Is this the right moment for a further expansion of the alliance?
Again, the question whether we can provoke Putin and whether the West can really provoke Putin. I think this is ironic. Putin wanted something else. He wanted to stop the east expansion of NATO. He provoked something completely different. Perhaps he is the side who is provoking, actually, in this situation. This is one thing. The second thing, of course, is that once those two countries are in NATO, and I do believe that they will be members of NATO soon, the questions will arise in the more eastern part of the continent. Why not Moldova? Why not Ukraine? So I think this is not the end of our very difficult discussions.
In theory, any promises made to Vladimir Putin in the past would now be essentially void, given the fact that circumstances have changed. Legal doctrine says as much. On the other hand, that's legalistic, Stefanie. The reality, as we say, is that we don't know how Putin will respond. Should NATO take in these new members?
Absolutely. I'm a big advocate of not leaving Sweden and Finland any longer in a strategic grey zone, because this is where they're in. I mean, they're very, very close partners of NATO for a number of years already. They're members of the European Union, but they remain vulnerable without Article 5. And it's, at the end of the day, nuclear protection given by NATO. So yes, it's a good news. And I think looking at Sweden and Finland as countries, they are vibrant democracies, they have first-class armed forces, they know that we're talking about, and I think we can learn from them in some ways as well.
So let me come back to our title, and I'm going to ask each of you, this is tough, but to please give me a yes or no answer. Is the West already a party to the conflict, or will it succeed in walking the thin line between support and intervention? Malte?
Legally, it's not a part. Psychologically, it could be regarded as such.
Realistically, we are already in war on Western values.
We stand with Ukraine. Does this answer your question?
I would say you have all very elegantly avoided a yes or no answer. Many thanks to you for being with us today. Thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you soon.